Blood dripped from his scarred hand as Julian caught his breath, watching the injured man on the floor. The man grasped his head in pain as blood continued to flow from his wound. In distress, the man called Julian a bastard for harming him. As a slave, Julian had never owned anything of value and was cast aside the moment he was born. He had no right to honor or personhood. He was controlled violently, without end. He possessed nothing, for he was forbidden to own anything. In the vast, endless ocean, a formidable ship cuts through the waves, its course set under the command of a seasoned captain and his loyal crew. On board, a contingent of 100 slaves awaits their fated journey, bound for a distant land. According to the captain, this shipment was the largest he had ever undertaken, a venture that would bring him a handsome reward. One of his men confirmed that if they were to cross the Allode Zone, known for sinking ships, they would be taking a risk. Legends say that the cursed water is home to a mythical beast that demands sacrifices to allow safe passage. However, the sea captain felt no fear. Instead, he viewed it as an opportunity. He dismissed his shipmates' concern with a slap, denying such superstitious claims. He then clarified that they would only be passing along the edge of the Allode Zone. While many recognized this area as a highly dangerous place, the captain saw it as a potential advantage for avoiding warships and pirates. With no one around to spot them, the situation suits their needs in delivering the shipment. Just then, another crew member approached the captain, informing him that they had found a stowaway. The boy sat quietly on the wooden flooring of the ship, surrounded by slaves and crew members, all pointing their spears toward him. He has long, wavy hair and is dressed in tattered clothing like the other slaves. He is bound tightly with a rope, and there is a trace of blood on the left corner of his lips. One of the crew suggested they kill him and throw him off the ship. The captain didn't care at all, dismissing the situation with a cold order to deal with it. Hearing the captain's orders, the slaves intervened, protesting that he was just a child. A crew member ordered them to keep quiet while threatening them with a spear. With a disgruntled expression, the captain muttered how he dislikes people who couldn't think for themselves. He then explains that they are already far from the harbor and only have enough food in stock for his men and the slaves. There is not enough food to share with a stowaway. A pregnant woman wearing a decorated cloak volunteered to share her food. The child was surprised to hear such kindness from a stranger. After hearing the pregnant woman offer her portion, a concerned slave was worried that she wouldn't get enough nourishment for the baby she was carrying, so he also decided to provide some of his shares. The others soon began to offer some part of their food as well. However, not all were pleased with such generous acts. A sick slave even alluded to how foolish it is to waste their limited supplies. To end the commotion, the captain ordered them to quiet down, indifferent to the debate. They let them do what they wanted. The slaves welcomed the boy aboard, calling him slave number 101. Below deck, the slaves were kept in a cell when not in use. The pregnant woman approached the boy and asked why he had sneaked onto the ship. He explained that he had heard that going to the continent would offer a chance to earn a living, enough to eventually buy his freedom. The boy then asked her why she volunteered to share her food, knowing she had no reason to do so. She then explains that slaves aren't treated with kindness. That's why compassion means so much to them. The boy, still puzzled, couldn't understand why someone would help without expecting anything in return. She clutched the cloth in her hand and replied that such acts of kindness are what allow them to maintain their pride as humans, even as slaves. An old man, observing their conversation, stared curiously at what she was holding. She revealed an old, rusted dagger one her husband had given her long ago. With a lack of money, she couldn't maintain the quality of the blade. The boy, surprising her, offered to polish the dagger. He explained that he was merely repaying her for the food she had shared. A simple blade like that was something he could restore. The old man asked where the boy learned to restore a blade. Julian learned to recover the quality of a blade when he was sold by his mother to a master blacksmith when he was little. Back when he was still under the rule of the blacksmith, he was tasked to do chores, leaving his body covered in ash and dirt. With the slightest mistake he makes, the blacksmith burns his skin with hot metal rods. The pregnant woman, with pity in her eyes, stared at the boy's arms covered with multiple scars and burns. The boy continued to tell his story. When the blacksmith almost killed him, he grabbed a grindstone and struck the man on the head with it. The other slaves who were listening were shocked, unable to believe what they had just heard. Julian explained that he had never known compassion, not even from his own mother, which is why he could not understand such kindness. The boy finishes polishing the blade and advised the woman to hide it well to avoid consequences from the crew. He also informs her that exposing it to the air will only make it rust again. The woman gratefully accepts the refined dagger and asks the boy his name. He responded, his name is Julian, and she gleefully introduced that her name was Mira. In the dead of night, the ship continued to sail across the ocean, its path illuminated by the moonlight reflecting off the glistening waters. Everyone was fast asleep except for Mira. She softly hummed and sang to her unborn child, eagerly waiting for its arrival. Julian, who heard her singing, suddenly woke up and kneeled beside her, asking when the baby would be born. The baby will be born soon after they reach the continent. Excitedly, she took Julian's hand and placed it on her belly, encouraging him to feel the baby. He felt something strange beneath her skin. Something is moving inside it. Mira happily explained that her baby was kicking because it was healthy. Julian stared at her in confusion. Mira's face softened as she spoke. She hopes her baby will be born safely and live a happy life. If such a thing could happen, she would willingly suffer for the rest of her life. Still confused, Julian lowered his head, trying to make sense of why she would be willing to endure such hardship for the child. Mira noticed his troubled expression and, with concern, asked if something was wrong. Julian felt tightness gripping in his chest. He grasped his clothes, feeling the ache deep inside. All his life, he had believed that being sold by his mother was a normal thing. Now, knowing that a loving mother like Mira exists, his experience with his mother starts to become agonizing. Mira, sensing his pain, gently took his hand again and pulled him into an embrace. With empathy, Mira recognized Julian's hardships and assured him that love and kindness exist even in a cruel world. She then begged him to never give up on his fellow men. Julian lay down again to sleep but ended up staring at his hand, thinking of the warmth he felt when he touched the baby from Mira's belly. The ship pressed onward through the night, its sails catching the wind as it ventured deeper into the dark ocean. The following morning, the deckhand called all the slaves to prepare for cleaning. The old man quickly suggested that Mira be excused, as it may be rough for her and her baby. However, no work means no food. Understanding Mira's situation, Julian volunteered to do his and Mira's work. All of a sudden, with a swift swing, the crew member's fist hit Julian's face. Mira exclaimed, expressing her concern towards Julian. The crew disliked a slave having a say in the situation. Julian persisted in doing the work, knowing he could work better than a pregnant woman like Mira. Again, hearing such virtuous words, he was ridiculed by the crewmen, who threatened that he would kill Julian if he worked lazily. A concerned Mira gently cupped Julian's face and asked if he was all right. He calmly replied that if she could have a safe delivery, it would make her happy, and that's why he wanted her to rest. With a soft smile, Mira thanked him for his kindness. The others silently watched their exchange of kind words while preparing to clean. During their meal, Mira offered a portion of her bread to the old man, but he refused to accept it. The sick slave, who looked down on others' kindness, offered some of his bread to the old man, explaining that he should have it because he was the oldest. If the old man collapsed from exhaustion, it would only increase the workload for everyone else. Julian stared at his bread, deep in thought. He then offered half of it to the sick slave, but the man declined, saying he wouldn't go as far as taking food from a child. Mira kindly explained to Julian that the man was letting him finish all his food. As the night fell and everyone else had fallen asleep, Mira sat with her back resting against the wooden wall, her eyes closing as she let herself relax. Like the other night, Mira sang to her baby with a loving tune. Julian woke from his sleep, hearing her sing, and asked if she couldn't sleep. She explained that she gets dizzy when lying down, so sitting was more comfortable for her. Julian couldn't help but feel how tough Mira's experience must be while carrying a baby. He was amazed by her dedication as a mother. It was the first time Mira had received praise from anyone, and she felt undeserving of it. She reached out and gently held Julian's cheek, telling him she wasn't a good mother at all. She shared the story of her son, about the same age as Julian, who had been killed by slave traders while trying to protect her. He had given his life to save her and the baby. Julian listened intently, trying to understand the pain Mira had endured. She couldn't do anything to save her son. She then recalls her son, who has the same dark hair as hers, smiling brightly. As a mother, she sees herself as a failure. But because her son had sacrificed himself for the baby, she was determined to ensure the baby would be born safely. Even with such desire, she feared that in the harsh world they live in, she couldn't guarantee her baby would ever find happiness. Julian stood up, recognizing the care parents have for their children. Julian held Mira's cheek, understanding her love for the baby and assuring her that the child she loved would be happy. He held Mira close to his embrace, providing her with a sense of comfort and assurance. Mira closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace after hearing his promising words. The next day, the slaves continued their responsibilities in maintaining the ship. Mira rested her back against the wooden crates, feeling the movements of her baby in her belly. Julian realized something while observing her, realized something important. Mira adored her baby not just because she was a mother, but because of the bond between them. It was that bond that made her care so deeply for her child. He could sense the profound connection between them, something he had never experienced. As he sat there, lost in thought, Julian reflected on his own life. His mother had sold him as a child, which meant he had never known the precious bond between a mother and her child. The thought saddened and frightened him, as he believed he would never experience such a connection in his lifetime. By evening, some slaves approached the deckhand, telling him the sun had already set and asking if they should end the day's work. But since their food depended on their completed duties, they were not allowed to stop yet. Hiding behind the wooden crates and barrels, Mira called out to Julian. He followed her and found her gazing upward, her eyes fixed on the sky, telling him how magnificent the sky was. He panned his eyes upward, revealing heaven's spectacular scenery filled with millions of glistening stars. Julian watches her as she observes the night sky flooded with lights. He, too, marveled at the beauty above them. Mira smiled at him and presented him with an idea. She imagined a life after their freedom, one where they could live together without any constraints. With her head lifted toward the sky, she spoke of the joy she would feel having him by her side. Julian lowered his head, contemplating her words and responding that he would consider. Mira chuckled at his response, then thanked him for considering the idea. Another evening arrived, and everyone was fast asleep, resting deeply. The old man and the sick man lay side by side, while Mira and Julian slept peacefully close to each other. That same evening, the ship was caught in a raging storm, tossing it from side to side. A shipmate exclaimed that the ship was drifting with the current, pulling them toward the allowed zone. The captain, confused, quickly checked the course and confirmed that they had chosen a route away from the zone. Pointing at the map, he reassured everyone that they were far from the location. However, one of his men insisted that something was pulling them toward the zone. The captain slapped him, dismissing the claim as nonsense, and told him the issue could be resolved by lightening the load on the ship. A crew member then called everyone to the deck. Slaves and shipmates alike stood, awaiting orders. As the storm continued to churn the ocean, the rain poured down, soaking everyone. The old man wondered if they had been called to help maintain the ship during the heavy rain. The captain, however, clarified that his crew of sailors was more than capable of handling the duties, with his men behind him, each carrying weapons as if preparing for battle. Confused, the old man asked what there they were for. With a quick force, a crew member stabbed the old man from his back with a sword. The crewman smiled with satisfaction. Blood poured out from the old man's mouth, and every slave, in surprise, witnessed the death of one of their kind. The old man dropped to the floor with his blood continuously flowing from his wound. Mira asked them what the crew members intended to do to them. The captain squinted his eye in disdain, telling them again how much he hates people who don't use their heads. Specifically, the sick, children, pregnant women, and the elderly. As the captain pressed his foot on the old man's body lying on the floor, the old man tries to tell them to run. The captain told them they were nothing but people of no value, whose work was always inadequate. The slaves had been bought for a low price, merely undesirable goods, and them undergoing an accident could make the situation different. Since they are all under the captain's property, he can exchange them for insurance money, which is how he earns a large amount of money. Knowing that no other ships cross that part of the ocean, no one will serve as witnesses. With his dying breath, the old man shouted, urging them to escape. Every single slave ran, screaming as they sought safety. The captain continued to taunt them, telling them to think. They were shackled and stranded in the middle of the sea. With nowhere to run, the crew members chased the slaves, piercing and stabbing those they got close to. The sea captain proceeded to order his men to throw the dead slaves off the sea. In the middle of the commotion, the sick man told Julian to hide behind him and find Mira. But before he could finish his sentence, he was impaled in his chest by a sword. His body fell backward as the other crew massacred the other slave. Julian stood there terrified, begging them to stop as if his words mattered to them. Another captive told the others to get to the boats while being impaled. The ship was filled with nothing but screams, sounds of weaponry penetrating the flesh, and groans from the dying people. With the ship's wooden flooring now filled with the deceased, the crew started to lift the corpses overboard. The bodies either floated or descended toward the abyss. The captain, looking at the remaining living slaves, was amazed at how everyone sacrificed themselves to safeguard the kid and the pregnant woman. Mira held Julian close to her, anticipating the death that was soon to come, while surrounded by the bodies of their fellow men. Stepping on a corpse's head, the captain continued to express how useless the slaves were and how meaningless their lives were. The only point of their existence is to help him profit. Julian grinned his teeth with anger, hearing the ship's master look down on them. Finally, the sea captain ordered his men to get rid of them. Suddenly, dark, long arms loomed from beneath the ocean waves, bringing everything to a halt. The crew stood frozen, confused and afraid, realizing something was terribly wrong. Their bodies stiffened, and not even the slightest movement could be made. The crashing waves ceased, and the raging storm quieted, as if pausing to welcome an arrival. Mira and Julian looked up, noticing that even the raindrops had stopped in midair. The captain, unable to believe what was happening, remained frozen in place. By the ocean, behind Mira and Julian, massive tentacles rose from the sea, revealing their enormous size. Both of them turned around, fear rising within them as they faced the monstrous creature. The tentacles slithered and coiled, gradually taking the form of something more recognizable. Everyone, including the sea captain and his crew, was horrified by the sight. Slowly, a woman's body began to emerge, her form draped in tentacles. Her head resembled that of an octopus, and her face was a dark void, as if gazing into nothingness. The mythical beast stood before them and asked if they sought her blessing. Stunned and unable to process what was happening, Mira and Julian remained silent, continuing to stare at the creature. The beast then explained her two conditions. The first was the offering of many souls, and the second was a sacrifice of pure love. Whoever fulfilled these conditions would receive her blessing. The first condition had already been met, and the second could be fulfilled by either Mira or Julian. The decision, the creature said, was theirs. One must die as her sacrifice, while the other would receive great power from her blessing. Julian, still confused, kept asking what she meant and what she was. The creature replied that her identity was irrelevant. What mattered was that she would take one life and aid the other. Again, they were asked who would serve as her sacrifice. Julian looked at Mira as she cradled her stomach. But Julian, even with a horror-stricken face, mustered all his strength to offer himself. He asked the creature to clarify if that person who remains shall be saved. She confirmed that whoever received her blessing would be kept safe. His eyes now filled with dedication, Julian volunteered to sacrifice his life, telling Mira to ensure the safe delivery of her baby. Mira bowed her head and bit her lip as Julian walked away from her. He wished for her to live a happy life. Upon hearing this, Mira lifted her head and saw Julian smiling softly. But as she gazed at him, a wave of horror washed over her, for she saw the smile of her deceased son reflected in Julian's. She quickly grabbed his hand, stopping him from walking any further. In her hand, she held something wrapped in cloth and claimed she wouldn't let such things happen again. Julian recognized the object immediately, and then Mira unveiled it. She pointed her dagger at her stomach, assuring Julian that she wouldn't let another child of hers die. She then asked her to take care of his new sibling. Julian ran to stop Mira from harming herself, but it was too late. Mira whimpered after stabbing herself, and Julian could only watch her in terror. Blood poured out from her wound, but she continued to slash across her stomach, resulting in more of her blood scattering. Once again, she assures Julian that she won't let anything happen to him. Her body was tense from the pain, while she bleeds from her mouth, not caring for herself anymore. She begged and begged, hoping that her baby would survive. And just like that, a loud cry filled the air. Mira safely delivered her baby and wrapped her in her cloak. She held her child feeling both happiness and pain as she saw her baby alive, but at the cost of her own life. She declared that the baby was a girl. As she handed Julian the baby and the dagger, Mira named her Diana. She embraced both of them, telling them how much she loved them, before stumbling from weakness. She walked towards the edge of the ship while she continued to bleed, and organs hung from her stomach. Julian called out to her, and for the last time, Mira gave him a loving mother's smile with tears in her eyes. She then toppled from the ship and fell overboard, straight into the sea. The creature spoke again, satisfied with the offering she had received. She then asked Julian for his wish, assuring him that power would flow from all the pain he had endured. Julian looked at the captain and his shipmates as he recalled their words. The sailors saw them only as worthless scum. He asked the mythical being for proof that the lives of his fellow slaves and Mira would not go to waste. The beast granted his wish and sprayed him with black smoke, concealing him from the sailors' sight. Black veins began to spread from Julian's irises as the smoke slowly faded away. The creature allowed everyone to move once again. Seeing this as an opportunity, the captain ordered his crew to kill Julian and the monster. He only thought of selling the creature for a hefty sum. But before they could go near them, there was a sudden explosion in the black smoke. In a blink, Julian dashed towards the captain, smashing him into the wall. Julian holds the ship captain in a chokehold as he stares with hatred. The captain collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Julian was still confused by his newly gained power, unable to understand what was happening. The sea creature explained that the life force of the 100 slaves who had been sacrificed granted him their power, speed, endurance, and reflexes. All their strength merged into one to grant him such ability. Julian looks at baby Diana, telling her to wait a bit more. He stood in front of the captain's men, ready to fight. They all charged towards him with the intent to kill, but Julian showed no fear. Every single one of the crew members died an awful death, only using Julian's hand. The shipmates lost a limb, were impaled, their heads twisted, and their skulls crushed. He made sure that their death was worse than those slaves whom they massacred. Julian killed and killed until no one else was left. He walked towards Diana, glad that she was unharmed. Before he could pick her up, a blade slashed his neck. Julian kneeled while blood gushed out from his wound. It turned out the captain was still alive. He managed to grab a weapon and take advantage of the situation after Julian let his guard down. He laughed maniacally, thinking he had the upper hand. Unexpectedly, Julian's wound began to heal, and black smoke started to emerge. Upon realizing the ineffectiveness of his attack, the captain stopped laughing, wondering how Julian could heal. Same with Julian, he too couldn't understand what was happening. The being who was still there assures him that gaining the blessing of 100 slaves means him receiving 100 lives as well. The sea captain tried to escape by dragging himself along the ground. When Julian fully recovered, he looked at the captain. The head of the ship attempted to make a deal with Julian, offering to share a third of the money with him. But without second thoughts, Julian lifts his fist, ready to kill. Telling the captain to use his head to think, he proceeds to hit the captain, assuring his death. Julian, cradling Diana in his arms, now drifted across the sea in a small boat. The colossal tentacles had torn the ship apart, dragging its shattered remains into the abyss. Before disappearing beneath the waves, the mystical creature spoke, its voice echoing in the depths. Because Julian had offered something dear to him, the creature declared that he could now cross the sea unharmed. They were also informed that the boat would reach the continent's shore in a day without the need to paddle. The creature's final wish was that luck would guide their journey. With the creature gone, Julian's attention was drawn to Diana's cries. As he held her, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Tears welled in his eyes from an overwhelming joy he had never known. All his life, he had never had anything valuable. But for the first time, he had something truly precious. He held Diana close to him as they faced the dawn. Crying is the baby's way of communicating their needs and their discomfort. There is no other way, Mira clarified. No other way, Julian asked again. That is how they express that they need someone. It is their way of saying, please don't leave me all alone. Being born into an unknown world scares them, she thought, as she held her stomach. It is important to soothe them by holding them close, smiling, and reassuring them you'll always be there for them. Even as she hears herself say it, she can't deny the comfort it brings her. She feels less alone. This connection gives her a deep sense of happiness. Julian recalled Mira's words as they continued to venture across the vast seas. Diana kept crying during their journey. Unsure of what to do, Julian tried to soothe her, understanding her frightful nature as a baby. Without noticing, their boat arrived in a shipwreck, blocking their path to the shore. Suddenly, a voice came from the water behind them, expressing how unfair the situation was and how envious they felt. Julian turned his head and saw sea demons in the form of fish-like creatures surrounding their boat. The demons have mouths filled with small, sharp teeth and blunt heads resembling those of piranha. Blood drips from their protruding eyes and huge mouths. The sea demons find it unjust that the mythical creature had ordered them not to harm Julian and the baby. They harbored a deep disdain for the land dwellers and questioned the blessing they had received from the mythical entity. Regardless of the great being's instructions, the demons refused to comply. They decided to kill Julian and the baby, even if meant for them to be punished. Stating such threatening words, Julian prepares himself in an attempt to attack them. One of the sea demons tried to reach them from the side of the boat with its slender claws, but Julian quickly leaped to higher ground. The demons voiced their desire to kill and devour the two humans, attempting to approach from the debris of the shipwreck. Julian realized that these creatures were connected to the octopus entity and observed that they couldn't leave the water. Any place beyond their reach, where the water did not touch, was considered land. Frustrated by their disadvantage, the sea demons merged into a single entity, transforming into a massive eye. The sea demon warned Julian that its brethren were already destroying the ship from the bottom up, and it wouldn't be long before they became their food. Julian shivered at the demon's chilling words, fear coursing through him. But he knew he must do something to keep her little sister safe. He glanced at Diana, who had begun to cry in fright. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and remembered all the people who had sacrificed themselves for their safety. The moment he opened his eyes, power surged through his body, and once again, dark veins appeared around his iris. Julian grabbed a long, sharp piece of wood from the wrecked ship to use as a weapon. As black smoke emanated from him, he leaped into the air and then plunged into the water to confront the sea monster. The creature revealed its enormous head, filled with long, sharp teeth. Julian struck the demon from above, forcing it to sink underwater. The monster was a colossal serpent, its back lined with fins and tendrils extending from its sides. Julian was able to stab the monster from its nape many times. But as the beast was in pain, it whipped its bladed tendrils and pierced Julian's body. As Julian started to bleed, more tendrils started to attack him, but he quickly sliced through it. The monster rushed to attack him again, but Julian quickly dodged it. He then tried to slash the monster, but it was able to avoid Julian's advance. Getting him off guard, the monster impaled him again with many of its tendrils. This time, Julian couldn't dodge and got even more wounded. The monster moves faster than him underwater, and he can't match its speed. But he proceeds to pull the tendril that was impaled to him. The serpent's head bent upward as it was being pulled and unable to move. Julian slashed through its body again and again, while the monster screamed in pain. He continued to shred its body with the sharp wood, putting the monster in vain. Before long, his vision began to blur, and his body weakened. The serpent grinned at him, revealing the blade of its tendrils oozing with poison. Julian realized what made him weak. The sea demon was aware of his 100 lives, for he was there when Julian received the blessing. Knowing this, the serpent let Julian submerge further in the deep waters to drown, making him use up all the lives he had gained. The monster looked up to the shipwreck where Diana was and told Julian that the baby was a burden forced on him for the rest of his life. Taking care of such a heavy responsibility is no different from being a slave. Julian continued to listen to the serpent while drowning. The demon, sarcastically, felt pity for the baby, who was living without its mother's presence. It continued, telling Julian that he could be reunited with his fellow men if he died. Everything eventually returns to the sea, including him, the baby, and Mira, allowing them to be together once more. With its tendril, the monster proceeds to impale Julian again. Reflecting on what the serpent has said, Julian envisions all the people he has lost, especially Mira. It was a snowy day, and young Julian recalls his mother walking away from him. With silver coins in her mother's hand, she has nothing but joy on her face. Even as a child, Julian understood that he had been sold. His mother didn't seem to have any second thoughts when she got rid of him. She didn't even look back. During the harsh winters, Julian would sleep curled up in the shed, trying to keep his body warm. He remembers all the burns he endured from the blacksmith and sleeping in the bitter cold nights. Yet, he also remembers the warmth he felt from Mira's love and the deep pain and anger he felt after losing her. Julian continued to sink into the ocean and saw a familiar image staring at him from the darkness below. It was Mira. She was calling for him, urging him to join her. He strained to move his finger, desperately trying to reach out to her. All Julian wanted was someone who wouldn't leave him. As he drew closer to Mira's figure, he stretched out his hand. Meanwhile, the sea demons continued to tear through the wrecked ship. The vessel began to crumble and sink into the water, causing the surface to tremble violently. Diana's cries grew louder, echoing through the chaos of the ship's convulsions. Her voice reached Julian, traveling from the surface to the depths of the ocean. He recognized her cry and turned toward it. Crying is the baby's only way of communicating their needs. There is no other way. That is how they express that they need someone. It is their way of saying, "Please don't leave me all alone." He suddenly recalled what Mira used to tell him. The experience of abandonment. He knows it too well. He realizes that his little sister is left to experience the same fate as him if he doesn't do anything. Filled with purpose, he let his power surge through his body again. The sea serpent noticed the changes in Julian's eyes and how he was resisting the effects of the poison's illusion. Julian curled his body and expelled a large amount of dark smoke, shrouding the serpent's vision. The monster didn't find Julian's actions effective, knowing that the poison still lingered within its body. With a swift movement, Julian punched the serpent's head with great force. The serpent was surprised to see Julian back in motion. Julian proceeded to smash the serpent's body. He grabbed the wooden stick he used to stab the demon earlier. The monster wondered if Julian had managed to dispel the poison along with the smoke. Julian skillfully maneuvered around the serpent, slicing its body, making his way toward its head. At a disadvantage, the serpent let out a frustrated screech. Julian continued to dash through until he reached its head, slicing it open in half. He called out Diana's name as he rushed for the surface. The serpent's brethren noticed him coming closer and decided to eat him instead. They gathered together and swarmed Julian, blocking his way to the surface. He slashed every incoming demon, avoiding their attempts to hinder him, and forced himself out of the water. The monsters continued to pester him by coiling their bodies around, biting him, and trying to pull him back to the water. Julian fought bravely, facing every sea demon that came close to him. The battle raged on, with water splashing, blood flowing, and smoke rising from his body until every last one of his attackers was defeated. He climbed back into the boat, carrying Diana with him. He was covered in wounds, blood, and his clothes torn. Diana cooed as if trying to tell him something. Julian apologized to her for leaving her behind and promised to always be by her side. He realized, at last, that he was not alone. The wind blew against his face, causing his wavy hair to sway gracefully. Finally, they reached the shore, and the boat came to a stop. Julian understood that they had arrived at their destination. Diana cooed softly to him, and Julian responded that he too had had enough of the sea. Julian got off the boat while carrying Diana. The first thing he thought of was to look for their needs: food and shelter. All he could think about was to provide safety for Diana. But before he could fully make it to the shore, he fell to his knees. His body started to feel weak, and his head began to spin. He wondered if it was due to the blood he lost during the fight with the sea demons, a lack of food, or sheer exhaustion. Lowering his head, he struggled to think straight from the fatigue and lack of nutrition during their journey. Then he noticed someone nearby. A girl stood before him. She had short, dark curly hair and wore a simple blouse belted with fur around her waist. She adorned her neck with a necklace and bracelet on both wrists. Bandages wrapped around her legs up to her thighs. She held a spear in her right hand with a fish impaled on the blade and a burlap sack in her left. Julian was surprised to see someone at the shore. The girl noticed the baby he was holding and remarked on how adorable she was. Before Julian could process what was happening, he heard the sound of rattling metal approaching. An armored man made his way toward them. His armor, made of layered metal for protection, was adorned with dark fur, and his face was entirely covered by a great helm. He was armed with a long sword. Julian wondered if he was a soldier. Its huge body towered over them. His first instinct was to prepare for battle, so he kept the girl behind him. However, the girl dashed toward the armored man, calling out his name, Engvall. She immediately told Engvall that Julian was hurt and needed assistance. Engvall noticed the severity of Julian's injuries and wondered why a child and a baby were in such a desolate place, alone. He then asked them where their parents were. Pain was evident on Julian's face as he recalled how they had survived. He told them that their mother sacrificed herself so they could live. The armored man instructed them to follow him, saying that they had goat milk suitable for the baby and that he could also treat his wounds. It wouldn't sit right with him if they were to die in such conditions. Engvall called them again to come along. The girls smiled and gestured for them to follow. Titi, Engvall called while holding a pail of water, instructing the curly-haired girl to hand him a needle, thread, bandages, and some clothes. Titi quickly complied with his request. Julian's back was covered in injuries, scars, and blood from the fight in the ocean. Engvall wondered how a child could end up in such a state. As he stitched up Julian's wounds, he noticed that, based on the blood, the injuries had already begun to close. Julian reflected on how his wounds seemed to heal much more quickly and felt that his body had become stronger. He hadn't realized how long the battle had lasted, but he had also discovered that he was able to breathe underwater. The more he used his powers, the better his body adapted to them. The sun was already setting when Julian finished cleaning up. He tried on some clothes, but they were too big for him. After experimenting with a few more outfits, he finally found something that was suitable for his size. Once Engvall patched him up and dressed him, he called everyone to have dinner. Julian was now wearing a white button-up shirt, a pair of dark pants with a belt, and bandages wrapped around both of his hands, his neck, his forehead, and over his right eye. The table was beautifully set with a variety of fruits, breads, meats, soups, and other dishes, along with clean water. Seeing all the scrumptious food in front of him, Julian's stomach began to grumble. He quickly told them that he had no money to pay for the meal, but Engvall reassured him not to worry because they didn't plan to take his money. Curious, Julian asked why they were being so kind to him. Engvall replied that it was only natural to take care of children, and there was no reason needed for such kindness. This made Julian think back to Mira's words. He couldn't understand why a stranger would help him without expecting anything in return, to which Mira had explained that it was about maintaining their pride as humans. Grateful for their generosity, Julian thanked them sincerely. He then asked Titi if they had a clean cloth he could use to feed the baby. After she handed him a clean cloth, he dipped it into a bowl filled with goat's milk and began to feed Diana with it. Engvall and Titi watched as he lovingly fed his little sister. After dinner, Engvall informed Julian that they could sleep in the bedroom on the second floor. Filled with gratitude, Julian vowed to return the favor to them someday. He introduced himself and Diana, and then Engvall and Titi introduced themselves in return. In the bedroom, Julian used a basket as a crib and placed Diana in it to sleep. Exhausted from the encounters he had experienced over the past few days, he flopped onto the bed, his tired body longing for rest. The night was peaceful, and the surrounding area was silent. However, before he could fall asleep, Diana burst into tears. Julian tried to rock her and pat her to sleep, but nothing worked. He understood that babies can get cranky at times, but he begged her to let him have the rest he desperately needed. Deciding to get some fresh air, he left the house. Titi was already fast asleep when he stepped outside. He walked by the lake to try to rock Diana to sleep and noticed a familiar armor and weapon lying on the ground. A woman was bathing in the lake, her bulky, well-toned body glistening in the moonlight. Her hair, reaching down her back, was slightly unkempt, with bangs covering her left eye. She noticed Julian and asked if something was wrong or if they hadn't been able to sleep through the night. Julian confirmed that they were having trouble because Diana wouldn't stop crying. To his surprise, he realized that Engvall, the warrior dressed in heavy armor, was actually a woman. Engvall explained that she wore her armor due to her duties as a soldier and her service to the country. As the night deepened, Julian and Engvall sat side by side. Diana, who had not stopped crying, was gently rocked to sleep by Julian. Engvall, now wearing her common dress, noticed that Julian seemed lost in thought. She could sense that something weighed heavily on his mind, especially when he looked at Diana. With honesty, Julian shared what troubled him. Diana didn't know that her mother had died because of him. He felt solely responsible for the tragedy. As a baby, Diana couldn't express her anger towards him for what had happened. Julian still harbored deep regret for not stopping Mira when she sacrificed herself. He believed he should have been the one to die in her stead. His emotions were evident on his face as he spoke. If he had died in Mira's place, they could have lived together as a mother and daughter, a proper family. Engvall listened intently and offered her perspective. She believed that there was no single right way to be a family. Even though she and Titi were not blood related, they still considered each other family. Family is something that people build together. It is not predetermined or fixed. She asked Julian what kind of family he wanted for Diana and what future he envisioned for her. With loving eyes, Julian looked at the sleeping Diana. He wished for her to have everything he never had and all that he had lost. A home, nourishing food, wealth, and freedom. He remembered Mira's loving smile and added one final desire: love. He wanted Diana to live a life devoid of worries, free to explore the world without concerns or suffering. Hearing Julian's words, Engvall recognized the challenging task ahead and emphasized that he must fight with all he had for Diana to achieve that future. Confused, Julian asked her what he needed to fight against. With a determined voice, she replied, "This unforgiving world." She explained that living such a life meant there was no time to hesitate or feel guilt. He needed to give his best effort to survive and raise Diana, as that was the path to providing her with a happy life. Perhaps, in doing so, he could also find a way to forgive himself. Engvall sat beside Julian and told him that earning money is a sure way to achieve happiness. She insisted that money can bring happiness, but Julian wasn't so sure about that. Engvall offered to help him look for a job next time, but for now, she advised him to rest. As she patted him on the head, she urged him not to push himself while he was still grieving. With her hand still on his head, she assured him that she would take care of them until he completely heals. Julian thanked her for her kindness, expressing that he hadn't encountered many kind-hearted people. By many, he meant 100. Engvall was surprised to hear such a large number. Half a year later, Titi called Julian to have lunch. Julian has now recovered, and his right irises have healed, but their color has turned pale, and there is an obvious scar under his left eye and across his right eye. He carries Diana with him, who is now dressed in more comfortable clothes. As they walk through the forest, Diana reaches out her hand and notices something that catches her attention. Julian asks her if she sees anything, but without spotting anything, they decide to head back home. Diana peeked at Julian's arm, still focused on the direction where she had seen something lurking in the shadows. There, she noticed a goat with dark fur and curled horns. The creature's eerie presence blended into the darkness as it watched the siblings walk away. Back when Julian was still under the blacksmith's possession, he felt a sharp sting from an injury. Only then did he realize that he had hurt himself while doing his chores. He suddenly overheard people talking outside. One blacksmith told his master that he shouldn't have bought a child slave. The master, however, planned to dispose of Julian once he was no longer useful. The other blacksmith chuckled, thinking that such an idea was absurd. Julian's master considered his actions to be acts of kindness. In his view, Julian couldn't escape the reality that he had been placed at the lowest level, especially since his mother had sold him. He believes that he was doing him a favor knowing that he'll never have a normal life. In his twisted logic, killing Julian would be a mercy better than forcing him to live an awful life. At that moment, it was morning at home. Julian insisted on finding work to help out at home after relying on Engvall for the past 6 months. He wanted to save up for Diana's future and repay Engvall's kindness. Without hesitation, Engvall suggested that Julian look for work in the nearby village. Julian, along with Diana, Titi, and Engvall, now fully armored, set out for the village to find a job for Julian. A man from the village quickly refused to offer Julian a job, saying that a child who couldn't pull his own weight would only become a burden. Villagers watched and listened during their exchange. Still, Julian insisted that he could complete any task they assigned to him. The villager continued, telling Julian that he looked like someone who wouldn't be fit for the job. He added that they had a lack of trust in outsiders like him, and that Julian must prove himself as a capable worker before they would allow him to take on any responsibilities. Julian then asked how he could prove himself. The man pointed toward the direction of the mountainside. There were 2 caves hollowed out from where they mined for iron. The cave on the left was blocked by stones and boulders, denying any access from the outside. Since the cave was blocked off, the man wanted Julian to remove all the boulders. If Julian could accomplish this task within a day, then they would accept him. The blockage was 10 meters deep, but the size of the boulders would only get heavier as he progressed inside. Engvall found the man's request impossible, telling him that it was an unattainable task, even for a grown adult. The man replied that Julian didn't have to do it if he didn't want to, or if he couldn't do it. However, Julian responded with determination, saying he would take on the task. He began carrying the boulders out of the cave. The villagers watched as he cleared the boulders with Titi and Engvall, who was now carrying Diana. The man remarked, acknowledging the first boulder Julian had successfully removed. Julian was already sweating, but he found the job easy and thought that he might be able to finish it. The day went by, and Julian's fatigue became more evident as he carried more boulders. He hauled them with all his strength, as though he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Outside the cave, beside its pathway, the boulders Julian had removed were gathered. The man mentioned that Julian was already a little over halfway done. Julian, now carrying a sack filled with rocks, struggled as he made his way out of the cave. But just after he exited, his body collapsed, spilling all the contents of the sack. He tried to catch his breath as he stared at the spilled rocks on the ground. His body felt so weak that he couldn't even move his limbs. Frustration welled up inside him as he realized how exhausted he was. Everyone was watching him, waiting to see what he would do next, including Diana, who reached out her hand to him with a smile. Looking at her, Julian knew he had to keep going for her sake. He began picking up the rocks from the ground and placing them back into the sack. He gripped the sack tightly and slung it over his back. Straining, he pulled himself up and began to crawl, continuing to struggle and catch his breath. Titi, worried for him, watched anxiously. Suddenly, Julian came to a realization. wondering what he was doing and if he really had to work himself to the point of exhaustion just to prove his worth. Someone suddenly grabbed Julian from behind. It was one of his fellow men, keeping watch over him. The sick man told Julian that he could use their strength to help him with the task, making it easier for him to carry all the boulders. The sick man and Mira smiled at him. His power began to activate as his fellow slaves waited for his answer. They were standing by the shore while Julian sat on the ground. Every time he was in trouble, someone was always there to save him, making him feel incapable of doing anything on his own. It reminded him of the time on the ship, when he was only kept alive because of others' sacrifices. He asked them not to be too kind to him. He wanted to take responsibility for his own life and bring them peace by learning to handle things on his own. Julian remembered Mira entrusting Diana to him. He knew he had a promise to fulfill, and he was determined to accomplish the task by himself. His fellow slaves were glad yet worried, seeing how determined Julian was. He understood that facing the challenge would be meaningless if he relied on others, so he would do it on his own. Julian continued to crawl while carrying the heavy sack on his back. Another villager thought Julian had already done enough and that someone should stop him. A woman remarked that he was just a kid, yet he was completely worn out. Engvall, who couldn't bear the commotion from the villagers, told them that they were the ones who had suggested the task in the first place, so they should keep quiet and just watch. By the time the sun was setting, the villagers continued to watch, emotionless. Julian stood beside the boulders he had successfully removed from the cave. He had completed the task. Covered in dirt and sweat, his once decent clothes were now ragged. He declared that he had removed everything. The man who had given him the task handed him a pouch. He admitted that he had been wrong, and that Julian was more than capable of finishing the task. The pouch was filled with coins. The man bowed his head in respect, saying that they had accepted Julian as a fellow worker and were grateful to have him. Julian smiled in relief. Back at the house, Julian folded Mira's cloak and placed it in the hole he had dug. He made a grave and hoisted a wooden cross on top of it. Julian kneeled and clasped his hands before the grave. He spoke to Mira as if she were present, telling her that she could now rest in peace and to keep watch over them. Julian called Tidi and Engvall in a hurry, telling them to look at something. It was Diana. She had already started learning to crawl. Tidi and Engvall were amazed by her progress. Tidi praised Diana for crawling so well, even better than Julian. He laughed it off, feeling teased. But Engvall couldn't help but laugh at Tidi's remark, letting out a soft chuckle. Julian couldn't believe Engvall found Tidi's teasing funny. She found it so amusing that she couldn't stop herself from laughing. She then proceeded to tease Julian by telling him how hard he had worked. Julian couldn't think of anything to say in response, as both Tidi and Engvall continued teasing him. The four of them enjoyed the simple moments they shared together. In the forest, Julian is chopping wood, guided by a man who is also holding an axe. Marie, sitting on a bench, serves as a nursemaid for Diana while Julian works. Julian's workmate, John, is Marie's husband, a good man who treats him as an equal. Together, they are tasked with chopping firewood for the village. Julian finds it enjoyable to work in the forest because of its fresh air and beautiful scenery. The animals and plants are thriving, full of life. He enjoys the work and feels a sense of fulfillment. Joseph seems to notice how satisfied and excited Julian is. He mentions that Diana is the same age as their baby and expresses his gladness and anticipation for the two children to grow up together and become best friends in the future. Julian feels the same way. Engvall and Tidi arrive, inviting everyone to lunch. They sit together on a picnic cloth, and the basket is filled with bread and sandwiches. Marie carries their child. Engvall removes her helmet. Joseph sits comfortably with food in hand, and Julian holds Diana while Tidi plays with her. During the conversation, Engvall asks if anyone has noticed anything unusual in the forest. Joseph notices Engvall's curiosity about the forest, but reassures her that, as usual, it is peaceful. He keeps saying that the forest is peaceful, though he isn't always sure about it. The continent is made up of 8 parts forest and woodlands, and they only explore the outer parts for resources. No one really knows what lies deeper within the forest. Joseph recalls that his father once warned him about it. According to his father, the vastness of the forest is unknown and is a secret domain for gods, beyond human comprehension. No man who steps deeper into the forest can ever return. Joseph thinks it might be better to ask his father directly, but because of his old age, his mind seems disorganized, and he tends to hide in the forest most of the time. Engvall remarks how she has tried to visit him several times, but he doesn't seem interested in talking to her. Joseph offers to arrange a meeting for them, which Engvall thanks him for. Back at their home, Tidi is still playing with Diana while Julian carries the baby. He then asks why Engvall is investigating the woods. It turns out the king has requested her to do so, and it is both her duty and honor to accomplish the task. Curious, Julian asks about the king. Engvall explains that she serves under the king's rule, and the king has ruled for over 100 years. Julian is surprised to hear how long the king has lived and wonders how he has managed to live that long. Engvall doesn't know, but she knows that the king is protecting the kingdom using godlike powers. The citizens see him as the supreme lord. Julian is intrigued by Engvall's mention of godlike powers. Engvall continues, explaining that one of the king's close followers, a prophetess who supports him behind the public's view, has foreseen the king's death. In the throne room, the king sits on his throne, his silhouette the only thing visible. Before him, under the stairs of his throne, kneels the prophetess, wearing a long veil. She tells him that darkness will cover the land in flames, and the king's downfall will halt his guidance over the land, leading to his death. Then darkness will spread across the land. The cause of the calamity must be sought and destroyed, or else the king will be the one to fall. That calamity is to be found in the forest. Julian asks why they have to go through so much, even when they aren't sure if the prophecy is true. Angval assures him that the predictions have never been wrong, and the king trusts the prophetess completely. When she was young, it was the king who saved her and her family, which is why she is forever in his debt. That is the very reason she chose to be a soldier to serve the king and the country. Julian asks her to clarify if she has to investigate the forest on her own. Angval clears up that she isn't alone. Scholars and soldiers from across the country are investigating the forest. She adds that if they were to see something strange in the woods, it would be best to tell her. At Joseph's father's home, he managed to set up a meeting between Angval and his father. His father is sitting at the table eating, while Joseph kneels beside him, telling him that someone seeks his knowledge about the forest. Across the table, Angval, Julian, and Titi wait for his response. Joseph's father has 2 scars that run from his ears to the lower part of his left eye. He stares as if deeply processing something while holding a spoon, but he turns his head when he hears about the woods. He begins to speak, saying there are tales about the forest from long ago. Angval asks him what kind of tales are told. He starts to think and looks out the window. Angval asks if everything is all right. The father responds that he's fine, and that he has heard of fairies, monsters, evil spirits, and witches. People made up those stories because they don't know what lies beyond the forest, but the truth, he says, he is not aware of. All he knows is that they shouldn't get involved with whatever beings might exist in the woods. The only way to coexist and live in peace is to leave them alone, and they shouldn't act recklessly out of curiosity. After giving them this warning, he starts searching for his spoon, which he is still holding. Joseph informs them that they will be hunting tomorrow and will simply report if anything unusual happens. Angval thanks him for his effort. Later that night, back at home, Julian is playing with Diana and notices her bright smile. He thinks she loves the night breeze, but then he notices that she is reaching out towards something in the forest. He tells her that there is nothing in the forest and walks back to the house. However, he cannot shake the looming fear of what might be in the woods. He tries to reassure himself as he distances himself from it. The following day, people from the village gathered, along with Angval, Titi, and Julian. The villagers were tense, chattering about something. One villager, the man who had given Julian the task of clearing the cave, couldn't make sense of the hunter story. He asked them to cut to the chase. One of the hunters insisted that Joseph had been taken by something in the forest. The man asked what they meant by something, clarifying if it was a bear or something else. Unfortunately, the hunters couldn't explain what it was. The hunter explained that Joseph had been tending to the rabbit traps, as usual, when it happened. A creature with multiple hands and sharp claws pulled him into the shadows. The hunters' faces showed nothing but fear and uncertainty. Marie was distraught upon hearing what had happened to her husband. She asked Angval what she should do without Joseph, feeling the doom of her loss. Angval held her shoulders and told her to calm down. She suggested forming a search party to look for him. The group could search along the edges of the forest, while she would go deeper within. Julian and Titi showed worried faces, unable to fully absorb what was happening. Joseph's father, wearing a cloak and equipped with a bow and arrows, volunteered to come along. He told them that he knew the forest better than anyone. The only thing he understood was that someone had disappeared in the woods. Marie then clarified that it was her son, Joseph, who had been taken. His eyes showed shock at what he heard, but he remained calm, assuring everyone that they had nothing to fear if it was Joseph who had been taken. He reminded them that, even as a child, he had taught Joseph to survive in the forest. He continued to reassure Marie that Joseph was still alive, calming her down. Due to his forgetfulness, he thought his bow was strapped to the other hunter's back. However, the hunter respectfully told the old man that his bow was already on his back. Julian thought that he could use his power to help, so he volunteered to join the search, but Angval firmly denied his request. He then asked why he wasn't allowed, but Angval made it clear that there was no need to discuss it further. She ordered Titi to take Julian and Diana back home, which Titi agreed to. Julian felt saddened by Angval's refusal. As they walked home, Titi asked if everything was going to be all right. With worry in her voice, she sought Julian's reassurance that Angval would return, but Julian himself was also filled with concern. Diana started to cry, and as he rocked her, Julian's thoughts drifted to the families that would suffer if tragedy struck Joseph's family, Marie and their child, and Angval and Titi. His thoughts then turned to a time when Mira had held Diana in her dying breath. Julian didn't want to see another child lose a parent. He handed Diana to Titi, telling her to take care of the baby, and made the decision to join the search in the forest. Titi was surprised by Julian's decision. As he was leaving, Titi called out to him. He looked back at her with an assuring smile and told her everything would be all right. Julian summoned his power once again. Back then, when Joseph was younger, his father taught him how to hunt in the forest. One day, his father waved at him to get his attention and then pointed at a stag. He gestured by pointing at himself with his thumb, explaining that the hand signal meant he was going to distract the beast. This gesture was commonly used by hunters to signal to each other and to ensure everyone understood the plan. Joseph nodded in agreement. After some time, they successfully brought down the stag and began skinning it, their tools and weapons carefully laid out on the ground. Joseph asked his father if he thought he would ever become a master hunter like him. His father paused for a moment before responding that it wasn't necessary for Joseph to be a master huntsman. What was important was that he didn't get swallowed by the forest and could always make it home safely to his family. It was every hunter's wish to die in the woods, but it left their families to suffer from the loss. His father had already witnessed the deaths of friends and didn't want Joseph to face the same fate. Joseph, reflecting on his father's words, replied that he didn't want to lose him either. Not expecting his son's response, his father chuckled, recognizing his son's cheekiness. Fast forward to the search for Joseph. Angval and Joseph's father ventured deep into the woods. The old man observed the footprints and bloodstains left behind from the incident. The blood wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest bad news. Joseph had likely been dragged off by a creature. Engvall asked what kind of beast could have done it. Sadly, Joseph's father couldn't tell from the footprints, as he had never seen anything like them before. He then warned Engvall to be cautious. Swiftly, Joseph's father moved through the forest, displaying the skill he had honed over years of being a hunter. He leapt onto a fallen tree as he navigated the terrain. The forest could distort a person's sense of time and space, which was why it was crucial to stay attentive to one's path and the position of the sun. Engvall, despite being an experienced warrior, struggled to keep pace in the dense woods. Joseph's father, though older, weaved through the forest effortlessly. Eventually, they arrived at a swampy area. Joseph's father warned Engvall that the swamps in this region were bottomless. He advised her to stay close to him and not to fall into the water. Suddenly, there was a rustling from the nearby bushes, and a growling bear emerged. Engvall was startled by the unexpected beast before them. She froze, and Joseph's father calmly told her not to make a move. The bear rose, growling to assert its dominance. Joseph's father readied his weapon and told the bear to back off. The bear stomped its feet in response. Joseph's father then aimed his arrow at the bear, his presence and intent instilling fear. He told the bear that he didn't have time to deal with it, and that it should leave. The bear, sensing the fierceness of the hunter, grumbled and turned away, stomping its feet as it left. It was a close encounter, and Joseph's father realized he had forgotten to bring the bell that typically keeps bears aware of his presence. Engvall stared at him, still processing what had just happened. He reassured Engvall, telling her to relax and that his mind may be muddled, but he never misses his shot. With concern, Engvall asked if they will be all right. They ventured further into the forest, and the deeper they went, the darker and more eerie it became. He wasn't familiar with this part of the forest beyond the tracks they had seen. He didn't recognize the footprints and was certain it wasn't a bear or boar. Engvall noticed that no sunlight or wind reached this deep into the forest, and the deeper they went, the more foreign the surroundings became. The air was still. They arrived at the center of the forest, where a huge tree stood, surrounded by dead and broken trees. The tree itself was dried up, with a large hole in its trunk. Its long roots spread out like veins, and its branches both thick and thin stretched in different directions. A man lay beside the tree. Multiple corpses hung from the branches, with most of them missing limbs. The old man and Engvall were both terrified by the sight. They could hardly believe the horror before them. Spotting Joseph on the ground, they quickly ran to him. Joseph warned them to stay back, saying it was a trap. Just then, something emerged from the large hole in the tree. It was the demonic beast that lived deep in the forest. It had an elongated body covered in fur, multiple arms, and several wolf heads with no eyes. Corpses also hung from its body. The monster spoke, telling them they had fallen into its trap. It mentioned needing a blessed child of the sea, and it had hoped that taking someone as bait would draw him out. But since it only needed one bait, it intended to kill the rest. Engvall couldn't believe what she was seeing. She questioned what the creature was, wondering if she was awake or if this encounter was merely a nightmare. Joseph's father froze in terror, and Joseph called out to him as he stood motionless. He recognized the clothes of the corpses hanging from the monster's body. They were the same clothes worn by his friends from long ago. Gozef, Bat, and Ruth. The demonic beast found the situation amusing and mocked him, asking if he liked its hobby of hanging the corpses of its victims. Humans are so easily frightened, it said. They cry and scream for help. He listens to those cries as a lullaby before bed. Joseph's father recalled the moments spent with his friends when they were still alive. With excitement, the beast remembered something they had said before they died and found their words laughable. I want to go back home. I don't want to die. I have to see my daughter. The beast saw them as fools who sobbed and begged, and it reveled in their suffering. It laughed maniacally, enjoying the torment of its victims. Joseph's father's face darkened upon hearing the monster's words. The creature mocked them once again, its twisted mind convinced it was being kind, telling them he would hang them all together with his dead friends so they can be together in death. The old man couldn't believe that, even at his age, he would still experience such deep hatred. He stepped forward, his heart steady and his resolve firm, ready to face the demon. Eat or be eaten. It was the natural order, a law that hunters and beasts both followed. He accepted it without hesitation, understanding that it meant he was prepared for death. But the monster before him was different. It didn't follow any natural order. It was not a creature bound by the rules of life and death. It was a cold-blooded killer, a predator that thrived on cruelty and chaos, without respect for the balance of nature. The monster didn't deny what the old man had said. Lifting its massive hands, it prepared to attack the three of them. Engvall reacted instantly, rushing to block the strike with all her might, but the beast was overwhelming. With a single, powerful swipe, the monster sent them flying. They crashed through the trees, their bodies smashing into trunks and branches with bone-crushing force. The impact left them disoriented, blood dripping from their faces and their limbs aching with the force of the blow. Engvall, blood flowing from her helm, lay unconscious, but the father and son, despite their pain, struggled to rise, their will to survive pushing them forward. Despite their injuries, they mustered what little strength they had left, preparing to fight back. Julian dashed through the forest, searching for Engvall. He quickly realized that running around aimlessly wouldn't help him find her, and he needed to sharpen his senses. He scanned his surroundings, alert for any sign of her. Suddenly, there was a rustle in the bushes. A bear emerged, roaring at him as he charged forward. Without hesitation, Julian continued his sprint, charging straight at the bear. In one swift motion, he punched the bear out of his path. The bear growled in pain as it tumbled to the ground, and Julian didn't break stride as he continued his search. His speed was evident, the motion blurring the trees around him as he raced forward. Angval was still sitting on the ground, her back against a tree. Joseph called out to her while his father readied his bow. He threw a bag filled with powdered ingredients and, with precise aim, shot it in front of the monster. The monster was startled by the unexpected attack. The bag burst open, releasing a cloud that covered the beast, blocking its senses and hiding them from its perception. The monster wrapped its body around a large tree to recover its senses and regain its ability to navigate its surroundings. The old man glanced back at Joseph, who was now carrying Angval. He told him to run while they still could. Together, Joseph and his father lifted Angval, sharing the weight of her body and armor. As they moved, Joseph noticed that the monster didn't have any eyes on its heads. It turned out that the creature tracked its prey through sound and scent. Out of curiosity, Angval asked what was inside the bag. The old man explained that it contained a mix of medicinal herbs and aromatic ingredients from the forest. These served to shield their scent from the demon's senses for a short time. Angval then realized that her blood could attract the monster to them. The old man had already anticipated this, and he planned to use her blood to gain the upper hand. He proceeded to slash open another bag of herbs and aromatics, which would help them cover their scent. Angval used a cloth to wipe the blood from her helm, which they would use as bait. Angval and Joseph followed his instructions, doing exactly as he said. The booming sound of the monster's footsteps grew louder, rushing toward their direction. Joseph recognized that the monster was getting closer. The demon cleared its path, pushing aside any trees that blocked its way. With the scent of the blood on the cloak, the monster eagerly followed, with intent on killing the humans. Realizing that the monster behaved like an animal, relying on its instincts and scent, gave them a brief moment of relief. If the monster was nothing more than an animal, the hunters might have a chance to fight back. As the monster continued its pursuit, Joseph quickly realized they were in a bad position, while Angval noted how fast the monster was catching up to them. With another swipe of its hand, the three of them were sent flying through the forest once again. The monster's senses were still muddled, making it difficult for it to find them. It tore through everything in its path, breaking apart anything that blocked its way. The monster wondered if it had accidentally killed them, as it longed to hang the humans while they were still alive. Angval was lying on the ground, while the old man, vomiting blood, knelt on all fours. He looked at his son, who was sitting nearby. Joseph lifted the blood-covered cloth, and his father, anticipating his next move, watched closely. Joseph then pointed at the monster from a distance and gestured to himself with his thumb. His father was surprised by what his son meant. Without hesitation, Joseph dashed toward the beast to catch its attention. He slid underneath it, but before he could get far, the monster sensed the blood-covered cloth in his hands and clawed him on his right shoulder. Despite the injury and bleeding from his mouth, Joseph threw the blood with all his strength. The monster followed the scent and reached for it. As the monster jumped to grab the cloth, Joseph ducked, telling the monster that it didn't understand its situation because it had been tricked. The demonic beast was startled as it fell into the water. Angval recognized the place, realizing they were already in the bottomless swamp. Water began splashing around as the monster flailed its multiple hands, trying to grab onto something. He recognized the marshes and knew it must quickly return to land. The monster's heads panicked as they started to sink into the swamp. But one of its heads noticed a tree nearby. One of its hands grabbed onto it, trying to stop its body from sinking. Angval pointed out that the monster had grabbed onto a branch, planning to escape the water. Frustrated and enraged by what had happened to it, the monster decided that the humans wouldn't be hanged. Instead, they would be torn apart and their remains thrown into the swamp. Joseph called out to his father, telling him not to miss his shot. The old man readied his weapon and took aim, standing firm as he faced the monster. He released his arrow, and it split the monster's hand from its arm. The beast was surprised, not understanding what had just happened. It fell deeper into the swamp, screaming in disdain. Joseph's father reminded them that his mind may be muddled, but he never missed his shot. Joseph ran to his father and Angval, asking if they were all right. The old man closed his eyes and asked his friends for forgiveness, for he had not been able to retrieve their bodies from the monster. As the old man spoke, telling his son that they were not the only ones who had been badly harmed, he noticed the water sloshing. His eyes widened as he saw a figure emerge from the monster's mouth. The figure quickly jumped and landed on the ground near them. It appeared to be a man, but its body was made of wood, and small branches protruded from its face. The creature loomed behind them with its right hand shaped like a blade. The three of them were caught off guard in the moment of surprise. The creature swung at them with its right hand, but Angval quickly blocked the attack, protecting Joseph and his father. The two men were still startled and unable to move. As the creature grabbed Angval by her fur, it was about to stab her. Joseph and his father tried to prevent it from harming her. Suddenly, quick footsteps rushed in, and a figure kicked the creature before it could stab Angval. The two men were taken aback by Julian's sudden arrival, astonished at how quickly he had appeared to intervene. Julian's presence was marked by a trace of black smoke. Joseph and his father were surprised to see a familiar face before them. Julian stood in front of them, ready to protect them. Julian stood tall, a shield between them and the danger, ready to protect them at all costs. Angval's voice broke through the tension, calling his name in confusion. Now, the Forest Guardian faced a formidable opponent. The two men helped Angval to her feet. Julian glanced back at them, expressing how relieved he was to have arrived in time to protect them. He then instructed them firmly to get behind him. The Guardian told him that he didn't understand his situation. He sees Julian as an intruder someone like him, who comes from the sea, shouldn't be invading the forest. With directness and intent, the Guardian told him that he would eliminate both him and the baby. Julian corrected him, saying that it was the Guardian who didn't understand. He vowed to make the Guardian regret its words as black smoke began to pour from his body. The forest guardian dashed forward, ready to slash and pierce with its blade, but Julian met it with equal speed. He deftly dodged all of the guardian's attacks. When he saw an opening, he clenched his fist and delivered a powerful blow. The forest guardian was sent flying, slamming into a tree, causing it to break in half upon impact. Engvall stood in stunned silence, amazed by Julian's strength. She couldn't help but wonder just how powerful he truly was. A sound of snapping wood began to resound through the surroundings. A creaking noise came from near Julian as he anticipated his enemy's next move. The guardian's body emerged from a tree behind him. He noticed it just in time, but the guardian attacked before he could fully evade. He was injured, but managed to move away before the strike could deeply penetrate his body. He turned and delivered a powerful blow to his enemy. The sound of the punch echoed as it hit the tree, but when the debris cleared, the guardian was already gone. Another creaking sound was heard nearby. The forest guardian emerged from the ground, slashing at Julian. Julian managed to counter, breaking his enemy's arm as it blocked his attack. But just before he could land on his feet, the guardian disappeared again. Engvall exclaimed in alarm, noticing Julian was bleeding from his wound, but he quickly reassured her, saying he was fine. As he began to heal, the enemy emerged once more from the ground, undamaged. Julian recognized the forest guardian's ability to move freely through the ground and trees, and realized, like him, it was capable of healing itself. However, Julian firmly believed that he was stronger, and that he just needed to strike his opponent hard enough before it could hide again. The guardian stood there, thinking. Suddenly, it lifted its arms, causing shards of wood to grow from them. It hurled them toward Engvall, Joseph, and his father. Julian immediately noticed the direction of the attack. The three remained in place, unable to respond quickly, but Julian was different. He was able to follow through with his enemy's movements. He blocked the shards with his body and caught some in his hands. Engvall cried out Julian's name in worry. The forest guardian produced more shards from its arms and threw them in their direction. Julian did his best to block and catch each one, ensuring they wouldn't hit the three people behind him. Engvall watched in vain as Julian sacrificed his body for them. She told him that he didn't have to protect them. Julian stood there, with multiple wooden shards pinned in his body and blood dripping from his wounds. Back in the blacksmith shop, his fellow slave was being beaten by the master blacksmith. The master expressed how disappointed he was in his colleague, calling him a burden for defying him. Julian could do nothing but watch as he cleaned the shed they worked in. The blacksmith continued to berate the young man, kicking him for his disobedience. The poor lad could only cry in pain and endure the harsh actions being directed at him. Regardless of whether one is rebellious or obedient, there is nothing that can be done to please the master. Later on, the lad remained lying on the ground. Julian returned to the shed to check on him and ask if he was all right. The young man was unresponsive, already dead, with blood coming from his head. Julian was terrified at the sight. He didn't notice the blacksmith standing behind him, holding a shovel. His master questioned Julian, asking if he had been helping the dead lad. As a result, Julian too was punished by the blacksmith, who used various tools to torture him. From his experience, Julian knew that nothing good would come from helping others. It was better not to think about it, as it would only lead to harm. Helping others would bring nothing but pain. Julian stood before them, his body covered in wounds, as smoke rose from him while he healed. He recalled Engvall's actions and words. She had saved him and Diana when they were washed up on the shore, and she reminded him that adults don't need a reason to care for children. Regardless of whether you're a child or an adult, he hated himself for doing nothing but watching. With a smile and resolve, he told them that he wanted to help protect the people he cared for, the slaves who had protected him, Engvall, Tidi, and Joseph's family. Being helped by so many people made him realize that helping others is what it means to be human. He dashed toward the enemy, catching it off guard while it was still producing another set of thorns ready to throw. As he observed from his position, he realized he hadn't wasted any time. He had simply studied his opponent's attacks and understood that there was a limit to the number of shards the guardian could throw. Thorns came at him, but he simply blocked them with his body once again. He also noticed that his opponent needed to recharge before it could attack again. Before the forest guardian could produce more thorns, Julian lowered his body in front of it, ready to execute his plan. The guardian tried to retreat underground, but since Julian's body was already positioned, he caught its left wrist. The enemy managed to slice his side, but despite the pain, Julian summoned all his strength to lift the guardian's body, throwing it into the air. He knew that it couldn't escape or heal if it was suspended in the sky. Julian jumped and struck the forest guardian's body with all his might, shattering it to pieces. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you love this manga. Have a good day.